The bridge the Roeblings built. Part 1. The city of New York has 5 different sections or boroughs. These 5 boroughs are Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, and Staten Island. Manhattan is the most important of the 5 sections. Perhaps it is better to say that Manhattan is the most famous of the 5 sections. The Empire State Building, Rockefeller Center, Wall Street, Times Square, Broadway, these famous places and many others are all located in Manhattan. Manhattan is an island. It is 12 miles long and about 2 miles wide. It has water all around it. To the west, there is the Hudson River. To the east is the East River. To the south, there is the ocean. It is possible to go by boat completely around the island of Manhattan. These rivers around Manhattan, with the ocean to the south, have been very important to New York City. They have been important commercially. Ships from all over the world enter and leave New York every day. They pass up and down the Hudson River and the East River. On the other hand, these rivers have also been a problem. Every time that anyone wanted to travel from Manhattan to another section of New York or to New Jersey, he had to cross one of these rivers. These rivers are wide. They are deep. They are deep enough for large ships. The problem is not so serious today. There are now tunnels and bridges at many points. There are 12 tunnels and 7 large bridges which connect Manhattan with Brooklyn and Queens. There is the George Washington Bridge and 5 different tunnels which connect Manhattan with New Jersey. Today, if one goes around Manhattan by boat, he will pass under 20 different bridges, many of them very large. He will pass over 18 different tunnels. Many of these tunnels are very large. Trains, subways, and automobiles pass through them in large numbers. These tunnels lie deep under the rivers. It has cost a lot of money to build all these tunnels and bridges. Years and years of hard work were necessary. Many lives were lost. Part 2. Many of these tunnels and bridges have become very famous. There are the George Washington Bridge, the Harlem Tunnel, and many others. The most famous of all remains the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge was built in the year 1883. It has been the subject of more poems, more articles, and more photographs than any other bridge in the world. It is still one of the most popular places of interest in New York. The plan for the Brooklyn Bridge was made by a man named John Roebling. This was the year 1867. Brooklyn at the time was a young city. It was growing fast. It had more than 250,000 inhabitants. It was becoming an important business center. But communication was poor. To reach Manhattan, one had to cross the East River by boat. This trip was very slow. In bad weather, it sometimes took a long time. People began to say that a bridge was necessary. It was almost a mile across the river. The river was very deep. The bottom of the river was soft. The bridge would have to be very high. Ships must be able to pass under it. Most people said that it was impossible to build such a bridge. John A. Roebling wrote a letter to one of the newspapers. He said that he could build this bridge. Roebling was already quite famous. Years before, he had invented the steel cable. Using this steel cable, he had built several bridges. One in Niagara Falls and a second across the Monongahela River at Pittsburgh. He was sure he could build this new bridge. Roebling was German. He had come to the United States to live when he was 25 years old. He worked first at building houses. Later, he became interested in building bridges. He studied all about bridges. He traveled everywhere to see them. It was decided to give Roebling a chance. A company was organized. Roebling was head engineer. He began to work making the plans for the bridge. He sent his son, Washington, to Europe to study some new bridges there. Some experiments had been made with working in a large box underwater. Roebling wanted to find out about these experiments. One day he was working near the river. He was completing his plans. A boat struck the dock on which he was standing. His foot was hurt badly. His foot became diseased. 2 weeks later, he died. Before he died, he cried sadly. He asked that his son, Washington, continue his work. Finally, it was decided to let his son do this. Part 3. Washington Roebling began to work with the same interest and energy as his father. The bridge was begun. There were many problems. According to the plans, there were to be 2 large towers. One of these towers was to be on the Brooklyn side of the river, and the other was to be on the Manhattan side. It was difficult to put these towers in place. The towers had to be very strong. They were made of granite. From the towers hung a system of steel cables. These steel cables were to hold the bridge. The bottom of the river was soft. The workers had to go far below the river. They had to reach rock. They had to remove some of this rock in order to make a good base for the towers. Today, engineers know how to do these things. They have had much experience. They have special machines. But at that time, no one knew exactly how to do this work. The Brooklyn Bridge was the first bridge of its kind in the world. They used the new box that Washington Roebling had studied in Europe. The box was made of wood. It was about the size of a house. It had 3 sides and a top. It had no bottom. In this box, men could work under the water. Air was forced into the box. The water was forced out of the box. It was very dangerous. No one understood the problems of this kind of work. Men became sick. They were afraid. There were many accidents. Roebling himself worked with the men in the box. He spent more time in the box than anyone else. He tried to encourage the man. The men felt strange pains in different parts of their bodies. One day, a worker went down into the box. He felt perfectly well. Within half an hour, he began to feel strong pains in his stomach. 5 minutes later, he was dead. The same thing happened to other men. Yet, the work had to continue. Roebling talked with the man. One day, he himself had a similar attack. He could not talk. He could not hear. He became paralyzed. After a week or 2, he felt better. He went back again to work in the box. He had a second attack, more serious than the first. He could not work again. In fact, he was unable to work again during the rest of his life. He remained a cripple. Part 4. But Washington Roebling continued to direct the construction of the bridge. His home was near the bridge. He sat in one of the windows of his bedroom. He used a telescope. He watched the work every day. His wife helped him. She studied mathematics. She studied all about bridges. She learned a great deal about such things. Each day she went to the bridge. She carried her husband's orders to the men. She worked with the men. At night, she returned to her husband. She told him about the work of the day. In this way, year after year, the work continued. In 1876, the first cable was placed from one tower to the other. In 1883, about 15 years after it was first begun, the bridge was officially opened. It was a great occasion. Many important people, including the President of the United States, took part in the ceremony. Washington Roebling watched the ceremony through his telescope. The bridge was a great success. It was strong and beautiful. People came from everywhere to see it. It was one of the wonders of the 19th century. It is still today. There's more traffic on it today than ever before. The bridge remains very strong. It also remains a monument to the two men who built it, John Roebling and his son, Washington. John Roebling gave his life to it. Washington Roebling was a cripple as long as he lived. But he carried out the dream of his father. He did something which everybody in his day had said was impossible. He built a bridge a mile long over a deep river, the Brooklyn Bridge.